Let's now get you updates of the big story politically as well, what happened in the Supreme Court yesterday. After months of an intense political war over the Waqf Amendment Act and protests, the Supreme Court gave an interim order on the petitions challenging the act. In the order that was seen as a victory both by the centre and initially by the opposition leaders and the petitioners as well, the top court has not really stayed the Waqf Act in its entirety, but has stayed some key provisions of the Act. Now, this provision that allows only a person practicing Islam for at least 5 years to create a Waqf has been stayed, but only till the time that rules are framed to determine how this will be verified. Next, the Supreme Court also stayed a provision which empowered a senior government official to determine whether the property that is declared as Waqf property can go through it or not. And those powers have been curtailed by the Supreme Court. In fact, the Apex Court has also capped the representation of the non-Muslims in the Waqf Board, saying 3 out of 11 in the State Waqf Board and 4 out of 12 in the Central Waqf Council can be non-Muslims. The Apex Court has in fact also said that there should be an endeavour to ensure that the CEO of the Waqf Board should be a Muslim. Now, after this order came in, all sides claimed vindication and called it a victory.
They have not stayed all the provisions, the complete act, but certain provisions have been stayed, like the provision that said that you have to be a Muslim for 5 years have been stayed, because there is no mechanism to determine whether someone has been a Muslim for 5 years or not.
So there is no stay on the amendments. Only there is a interim order. Those works which are not registered, they will not be treated as Waqf property.
कलेक्टर के जो जजमेंट होते हैं वो तो पहले भी अपील होते रहे हैं। बाकी मेरा ये मानना है कि जो नया वाला कानून है वो 99.99% एक तरीके से इफेक्ट में है, उसमें कोई रोक नहीं लगेगी।
But let's now also get you what the opposition leaders have been saying. Remember, many of these opposition leaders have also been petitioners in the case in the Supreme Court, and they were quick to declare that this order by the Supreme Court was a tight slap in the face of the government and a substantial win for not just them, but also the members of the JPC who submitted dissenting notes but were ignored completely.
सरकार की साजिश और सरकार की मंशा पर माननीय उच्चतम न्यायालय ने बड़े पैमाने पर रोक लगा दी है, अंकुश लगा दी है। तो पूरे देश में अपनी जमीनें दान करने वाले लोग, धार्मिक कामों के लिए, सामाजिक कामों के लिए, जिनको ये डर था कि सरकार उनकी जमीनें लूटने की कोशिश करेगी, फौरी तौर पर उनको बहुत बड़ी राहत मिली।
ये जो इंटरिम ऑर्डर आया है, इससे जो कानून मोदी सरकार ने बनाया है, इससे वक्फ प्रॉपर्टीज का तहफ्फुज नहीं होगा, प्रोटेक्शन नहीं होगा और एंक्रोचर्स को रिवॉर्ड किया जाएगा।
कि बीजेपी आरएसएस वक्फ की जमीनों को कब्जा करके इस देश के पूंजीपतियों को बेचना चाहती थी। हम सब लोगों को सर्वोच्च न्यायालय से भरोसा था कि वहां से न्याय मिलेगा। जो फैसला आज आया वो एनडीए के मुंह पे एक ऐसा करारा तमाचा है।
एक ही मजहब के लोगों को जो है निशाना बनाया जा रहा है। अच्छी बात है कि सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने भी इस चीज को समझा है। हुकूमत का इल्जाम है कि गैर कानूनी तौर जो है किसी वक्फ ने जमीन पे कब्जा किया हुआ है। अब हुकूमत उस जमीन को वापस नहीं ले सकती।
So you heard the opposition that is once again parroting the same narrative that the Waqf property is under threat and that the government is looking to snatch away such property. But the Supreme Court crushed the ecosystem's narrative completely during the order, point by point. So today, let's break it down for you and tell you how there were multiple such alarmist claims that were made by the opposition leaders and the petitioners, but it was all shot down by the Supreme Court. So let's break it down for you. You remember what the opposition has been saying. They first, of course, had also demanded that the entire Waqf Act amendment should be scrapped completely. That was junked by the Supreme Court completely, and it has said that it is constitutional. Apart from that, the opposition had also contended that religious sites will be snatched away. That was a fear-mongering that had gone on. Remember, it also led to multiple protests across the country with the allegation or with the claim that was made by the opposition that religious sites will be snatched away. The Supreme Court has outright rejected this argument by the opposition in the court. Apart from that, remember, the opposition had also gone on to say that Waqf by user deletion is arbitrary and that should not happen. But the Supreme Court has rejected those arguments. The opposition had also gone on to say that non-Muslims should be allowed to donate. Now, in this juncture, it's important what the Supreme Court went on to say, because the opposition said that Waqf only pertains to Muslims, and they continued to say that this was a threat to the minorities in the country. But in the Supreme Court, they said that non-Muslims should be allowed to donate. Now, it's important what the Supreme Court said, because the Supreme Court said that the stand of the petitioners, the stand that the opposition leaders have been taking, is contradictory. On one hand, you say Waqf is only for Muslims. On the other hand, you say non-Muslims should also be allowed to donate. In any case, even now, non-Muslims can donate. So that is what the Supreme Court went on to say. Another contention that the opposition had was that the Waqf property will be usurped by the government, and the Supreme Court going on to say that earlier the Waqf Act was misused to avoid any legal hurdles, and that's the reason why the act has been brought in. So these were some of the arguments that were made by the opposition leaders and then shot down by the Supreme Court. Remember, this is the interim order by the top court. The Union Minister, Kiran Rijiju, welcomed the Supreme Court's ruling on the Waqf law, which has been stayed, not in its entirety, but just some clause. Rijiju, in fact, hails the order, saying that it provides clarity and reassurance to the people across the country, and that the reforms that have been introduced by the government remain intact. The Union Minister highlighted that the deletion of the concept of Waqf by user has been upheld by the court, and so has the limited inclusion of the non-Muslims in the Waqf board, saying this was something that the centre had in itself said. In fact, the Union Minister also further asserted that the government will fully comply with the court's order.
एक तरीके से पार्लियामेंट ऑफ इंडिया का जो डिसीजन है उसको कायम रखा, जजमेंट का स्पिरिट और जो पूरा संपूर्ण ऑर्डर का भाव को मैं कहना चाहता हूं। पार्लियामेंट्री डेमोक्रेसी के लिए ये जजमेंट बहुत अच्छा संकेत है।
जिस तरह से वक्फ को लेकर के पूरे अराजकता, उद्दंडता की पराकाष्ठा थी, उसको लेकर के अलग अलग तरह के कन्फ्लिक्ट दिखाई पड़ते थे, कंफ्यूजन दिखाई पड़ते थे, वो करेक्ट हुआ है।
फैसला सुप्रीम कोर्ट का आया है कि एक तरह से सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने लोकसभा राज्यसभा द्वारा पारित इस वक्फ अमेंडमेंट एक्ट के वैधता पे मोहर लगा दी है।
My colleague Niyamika is joining us on the broadcast with the details. In fact, Niyamika had also spoken to some of the opposition leaders who claimed vindication. But Niyamika, we just broke down the details of the Supreme Court order, the detailed order in which the Supreme Court has also shot down many of the claims or contentions that were raised by the opposition leaders. And yet you have many from the opposition continuing to say that this is vindication of their stand. Now that the order is out, I'm also accessing it and the details of it are out, how is the opposition looking at what happened in the Supreme Court?
Well, Pratibha, both the sides, both government as well as opposition, are celebrating their victory after the Supreme Court has given its verdict regarding the Waqf Amendment Act. We have seen that how the opposition is basically saying that it is a tight slap on the face of the government of India, the manner in which this Waqf Amendment Act was being passed in the Parliament. At that point in time, we have seen that how several of the opposition leaders have raised a concern that it is basically an attack upon the minorities. It is an attack upon the Muslim community in particular, and that is the only reason why they had challenged it in the Supreme Court. And yesterday's verdict, they are welcoming it only because they are saying that the Supreme Court has made interventions in several of the clauses which are very much necessary. Whether it is about the inclusion of the non-Muslims in this panel, they are saying that the Supreme Court has also mentioned it very clearly that the CEO should preferably be a Muslim person only, and in case there is no such Muslim person can be found, then only a non-Muslim should be appointed at the CEO, which is being welcomed by the opposition parties in particular. In fact, we have also spoken to the former Union Minister and the senior Congress leader, Mr. Salman Khurshid, and he had stated that it's a win-win situation for every citizen. It is not about the opposition or the government side. It is basically the protection of which is being given by the Supreme Court of India to these institutions, because there were several of the doubts which were being raised by the opposition parties regarding the intention of the government of India behind this bill. We had also spoken to several other leaders, including Imran Pratapgarhi, and he had stated that the bill wasn't brought in by the...
So many of these opposition leaders, while they claim that it was partly a victory for them as well, completely ignored the fact that the Supreme Court also shot down many of the statements that they had made, fear-mongering about the amendments to the Act, isn't it? We'll have to leave it at that. Nyamika, my apologies. Thank you for joining us with those details. With that, it's time for us to slip into a very quick break here. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with lots more on the other side.